the swinging doors, the clinking glasses, the jovial bartender who knows your name. This is the Wild West Saloon we've all been sold. A place of rough camaraderie, high-stakes poker, and cold, clean whiskey. It's the centerpiece of 1,000 movie myths, but a lot of it is a lie, a carefully constructed fantasy. Behind the cinematic facade lies a much darker, more predatory reality. For many frontiersmen, these weren't just bars. They were carefully designed traps. Now, it's true that some saloons served as vital community centers, post offices, and meeting halls, the social and political heart of a new town. But many others operated on a foundation of pure deception. They were ruthless economic machines engineered to fleece a man of his wages, his property, and sometimes his health. In the real saloons of the frontier, the drinks could be chemical concoctions, the free food was a strategic deception, and the games were almost always rigged. Today, we're exposing the brutal, systematic scams that separated a frontiersman from his money, and sometimes his life. This is the Great Saloon Scam. The heart of any saloon was its whiskey. But what was actually in the bottles and barrels was often a far cry from aged bourbon. True, aged whiskey was a luxury, expensive, and difficult to ship west. For a saloon keeper looking to maximize profit, selling the real thing was often out of the question. The solution was simple: fake it. What prospectors and cowboys were often drinking was a vile homemade concoction known by a host of grimly appropriate nicknames: Tanglefoot, Red Eye, Tarantula Juice, and perhaps most honestly, Coffin Varnish. The base of this so-called whiskey was typically cheap, raw grain alcohol, essentially unaged moonshine. But clear, harsh alcohol didn't look or taste like whiskey, so bartenders got creative. To give the spirit its amber color, a common additive was burnt sugar or molasses. To give it the bite of real whiskey, they'd add a plug of chewing tobacco. This not only added color and flavor, but also a dose of nicotine to enhance the buzz. But the deception often didn't stop there. To stretch their supply and increase the perceived potency, some saloon keepers would cut the raw alcohol with anything from cayenne pepper to ammonia. More extreme and sensational accounts, though not routine practice, even mention additions like turpentine, creosote, or even strychnine. This wasn't whiskey. It was a chemical cocktail, often poured from colored bottles designed to hide its unappealing appearance. While more established saloons in towns like Tombstone might import finer spirits, the rotgut served in remote camps was notoriously hazardous. Before the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, there was no comprehensive federal oversight, and the patchwork of local and territorial laws was spotty and difficult to enforce on the chaotic frontier. For many drinkers, the only protection was a strong stomach and the hope that tonight's drink wouldn't be their last. For the patron who knew enough to avoid the house rotgut, the answer was to order a fancy mixed drink. By the late 19th century, cocktail culture had begun to emerge. But even here, danger and deception lurked. Legends from the Southwest told of drinks like cactus wine. The stories claim it wasn't wine at all, but a potent mix of tequila and peyote tea. Peyote contains mescaline, a powerful psychoactive compound used for millennia in indigenous rituals. In the hands of a crooked saloon keeper, it could become a tool of profound disorientation. An unsuspecting cowboy ordering this rumored drink wouldn't just get drunk. He'd be sent into a hallucinatory state, making him an easy target for theft. While evidence for this as a standard saloon offering is scarce and likely folkloric, it shows the predatory reputation some establishments earned. A more common trick was to blend the harsh house rotgut with sweet blackberry liquor or other flavorings. The sweetness of the liquor helped mask the harshness of the underlying spirit, duping a patron into paying a premium for the same cheap alcohol he was trying to avoid. And what about beer? Hollywood shows cowboys enjoying frosty mugs, but before the widespread advent of artificial refrigeration in the 1880s, that was a rare luxury. Beer was almost always served at cool cellar temperatures, not ice cold. In many places, it was a locally made, unpasteurized homebrew that you had to drink fast before it went warm and flat. So whether it was a shot of coffin varnish, a deceptively sweet cocktail, or a lukewarm beer, the simple act of ordering a drink in a frontier saloon could be a gamble in itself. The house wasn't just serving alcohol, it was serving risk. One of the most ingenious scams in the saloon playbook had nothing to do with alcohol. It was the food. Many saloons lured patrons with the promise of a free lunch. In a world where a hot meal was a welcome luxury, this offer was hard to resist. While some old-timers recalled grand buffets, many of these spreads were far more grim. More importantly, the entire concept was a calculated trap. The principle was simple: use food to sell more drinks. The offerings were almost always intensely salty, spicy, or greasy. Think platters of smoked herring, heavily salted pretzels, pickled eggs, and spicy sausages. A man would eat the free food only to find himself with a raging thirst, compelling him to buy round after round of overpriced drinks. The cost of the food was more than covered by the increased alcohol sales it generated. This practice is one of the things that helped popularize the famous saying, "There ain't no such thing as a free lunch." The lunch wasn't free. It was a marketing cost. The quality of these lunches varied wildly. In a competitive Chicago or New Orleans saloon, you might find a respectable spread. But in a dusty frontier outpost, the free lunch could be a different story. With no sanitation standards, the food could pose a genuine health risk, sitting out for hours attracting flies. Communal serving utensils often sat in jars of murky water, creating a perfect breeding ground for bacteria. The free lunch was the perfect scam. It preyed on a basic human need, hunger, and turned it into a profit engine. It presented itself as an act of generosity while functioning as a psychological weapon, ensuring that the man who came in for a free meal left with an empty wallet. For many saloons, alcohol wasn't even the primary source of revenue. The real money was made at the gambling tables. And just like the whiskey, the games were often another layer of the great saloon scam. While we picture poker for much of the 19th century, another game reigned supreme: Faro. It was fast-paced, easy to learn, and in an honest game, offered some of the best odds a player could find. But there's the catch. Finding an honest game was nearly impossible. Faro's reputation was so notorious that it was often called bucking the tiger, a reference to the tiger illustrations on early card sets that came to symbolize the game's predatory nature. Cheating was rampant. Professional dealers used a variety of methods to ensure the house always won. The dealing box could be rigged or gaffed to let the dealer manipulate the cards. Marked cards and sleight of hand were standard tools. The problem was so bad that gambling manuals of the era flatly warned readers that honest faro banks were extremely rare. Famous con artists like Soapy Smith built their empires on rigged games. It was said that his faro tables were notoriously crooked. When the famed gambler Canada Bill Jones was asked why he kept playing a game he knew was rigged, he reportedly replied, "It's the only game in town." Of course, other games were popular too. Three-card Monte was a classic con based entirely on sleight of hand, and dice games were easily manipulated. Even poker, a game of skill, was often corrupted by cheaters. The combination of heavy drinking and rigged gambling was a powder keg. Accusations of cheating frequently led to brutal, sudden violence. Not the drawn-out brawls of Hollywood, but quick, lethal encounters. For the average cowboy or miner, stepping up to the gambling table was the final stage of the fleece. He'd been lured in by the promise of company, weakened by doctored whiskey, and made thirsty by the salty free lunch. Now, in a state of impaired judgment, he was invited to bet his wages on a game he had almost no chance of winning. No portrait of the saloon is complete without the saloon girl. Hollywood often portrays them as either fallen women or heroines with hearts of gold. The reality was a role born of economic necessity, often centered around yet another deception. Many of these women were entertainers, sometimes called percentage girls. Their job was to sing, dance, and provide companionship to lonely men. Their income wasn't based on a salary, but on a commission, a percentage of the drinks they could convince patrons to buy. This created a fundamental challenge. To be successful, a saloon girl had to encourage men to drink heavily, but she couldn't get drunk herself. Her sobriety was her livelihood. A common trick of the trade was a simple but effective scam. When a cowboy offered to buy her a drink, she would accept. But the whiskey she received from the bartender was often just cold tea or colored water, served at the full price of top-shelf liquor. The customer paid for 2 whiskeys, the house pocketed the profit from the fake one, and the saloon girl earned her commission while staying perfectly sober. This isn't to say prostitution was absent from saloons. In rougher establishments and brothels, the line between entertainer and prostitute was often blurred. But the core role of many percentage girls was that of a saleswoman. Her charm and her feigned intoxication were all tools of the trade, designed to keep a man buying drinks long after his better judgment had dissolved in a haze of rotgut. Alcohol and gambling were the main events, but the saloon's inventory of vices didn't end there. The same inconsistent regulation that allowed for doctored whiskey also created a market for other substances. In some frontier towns, particularly those with large populations of transient laborers, opium dens became a feature of the vice district. While often separate from saloons, their presence was part of the same unregulated landscape. Opium and its derivatives, like laudanum, were also legal and widely available as patent medicines, used for everything from pain to anxiety. Their availability in the frontier ecosystem added another layer of addiction and dependency. Tobacco, of course, was everywhere. The air in most saloons was thick with smoke. Spittoons overflowed, and floors were often covered in sawdust to absorb spilled liquor and tobacco spit. And as we've seen, tobacco served a dual purpose. It was both a product sold to a customer and a key ingredient used to adulterate the whiskey in his hand. The saloon wasn't just a bar. It was often the frontier's one-stop shop for vice, where nearly every product was part of a system designed to keep you there, keep you spending, and keep you coming back for more. The Hollywood Saloon is a stage for heroes and villains. The real frontier saloon was something far more complex and insidious. It was a business. And for many, its business was deception. While these establishments did serve as the social hearts of their communities, they were also frequently built on scams. From the coffin varnish, passed off as whiskey, to the salty free lunch and the rigged faro games that promised fortune but delivered ruin, the saloon could be a masterclass in predatory economics. It was a place where the odds were always stacked in favor of the house. The great saloon scam wasn't a single con. It was an environment, an entire system of interlocking deceptions. It reminds us that behind the myth of the Wild West lies a harsher truth. In a world defined by survival, the most dangerous threats aren't always the ones holding a gun. Sometimes, they're the ones pouring you a drink.